U.S. President Donald Trump announcing an agreement has been made with Japan. And Janice McGregor is on that part of the story for us this morning from Washington. Janice, this is Trump's first deal with a major trading partner since he sent out those tariff letters earlier this month. So what should Canadians be taking away from this deal?
Well, let's start with the compromise they reached in terms of kind of the headline across the board tariff rate. 15% is what Japan has settled for. That is lower than the 25% threat that Donald Trump had written into his letter for Japan. The fact that it's lower, perhaps part of the reason anyway, we're seeing some relief on the part of the markets overnight. This lower rate, it's important to emphasize to everyone, is not something that the Japanese pay. It is what American consumers and American businesses will be paying on any Japanese goods imported into the U.S. It is effectively a sales tax at a time of, I have to say, considerable price inflation. And Donald Trump would have had to keep that in mind as this negotiation proceeded. It is landing higher than the 10% that was previously applied to, for example, Japanese cars and automotive parts heading into the U.S. Unlike the UK, which got a 10% rate, the Japanese here have not agreed to a quota, a future cap on the growth of the Japanese auto industry as far as its exports into the US are concerned. And the ambition of that, I think, is quite noteworthy on Japan's part. Japan has had sort of a favorable position with the US in terms of its trade surplus, the trade deficit that Donald Trump focuses on, the fact that there's more Japanese imports coming into the U.S. than U.S. exports going into Japan is something Donald Trump has portrayed as a weakness. Economists would disagree and would note that it's probably more a strong sign of the power of the American consumer. But nevertheless, that's why it's so interesting to see Donald Trump last night out there bragging about how Japanese companies are apparently, you know, we haven't seen fine print on this, but he says they're going to be investing $550 billion into the U.S. economy under this deal. Now, we already know there's been a deal to inject $15 billion in a takeover by the Japanese of U.S. steel for that industry. Will we see more automotive supply chain announcements follow? What is that going to mean for perhaps some pivoting of Japanese investment away from, say, Canada and into the U.S.? This has to be a cause for concern. But here is the U.S. president touting his big win last night.
Just signed the largest trade deal in history, I think maybe the largest deal in history with Japan. And that was done with Japan. They had their top people here, and we worked on it long and hard, and it's a great deal for everybody. I always say it has to be great for everybody. It's a great deal. A lot different from the deals in the past, I can tell you that.
And here we have to pause and talk about agriculture for a minute, because Japan made a pretty historic concession to land this deal. It helped Donald Trump deliver a big win for American farmers by agreeing to open up its notoriously protected rice markets, in particular, other agriculture commodities as well. The price of rice, though, in particular, was a major concern of voters when Japanese voters went to the polls in their parliamentary elections last Sunday. The governing Liberal Democratic Party failed to secure a majority in that election. The Japanese Prime Minister, won't play the clip because it's in Japanese, but he was out trying to save face a little bit by noting that in this deal, Japan got a better tariff rate than any other country had been looking at with the letters they'd received, ones where Donald Trump was concerned about a trade deficit, trying to put a good spin on this. But it is awfully hard to see this as being a terribly good deal for Japan when you compared this to sort of what they had enjoyed, for example, even a year ago.
Janice, I want to go back to Donald Trump's comments there, where he said that this is the largest trade deal in history. Can you fact check that for us a little bit?
Yeah, not so much. I pulled the stats, and the size, if you go by last year's trade volumes of this trading relationship between the U.S. and Japan, is about a quarter of the total value of the annual trading relationship between the U.S. and Canada. So by that metric, it's really hard to see that this could be considered a deal bigger than, for example, the renegotiation of NAFTA under Trump's first administration. And on top of that, we have to remember that this is a deal that rather than liberalizing trade, is actually adding new taxes to it, bogging it down with that fresh burden. So it really can't be seen in the same light. Nevertheless, important to note that the U.S. and Japan did not have a preferential bilateral trade agreement between them ever since Donald Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada in a very different boat. It is part of that Pacific Rim trade deal with Japan. It, of course, does have CUSMA in place with the U.S. That is why the 35% tariff that Donald Trump has threatened Canada with is not quite as dire, because CUSMA-compliant goods are exempt from that, notwithstanding the pain of the sectoral tariffs on things like steel, aluminum, and of course, softwood lumber. So we really do need to see, and the urgency for Canada is in dealing with the uncertainty around all of this, just as much as it is any particular tariff rate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Janice McGregor for us there in Washington. Thank you, Janice.
You're welcome.